Just want to say I welcome you to our special First Wednesdays event, Sorting the News from the Chaff. It's a talk with Mark Timney. We extend our thanks to our partners at Vermont Humanities, as well as to the generous underwriters who make it possible for us to offer such rich and robust programming. The sponsor of the entire First Wednesday season is the Vermont Department of Libraries and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Tonight we come together from across the state, across town, maybe even around the world, to listen, learn, and to be inspired in community. Before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items. Be sure to check in for this event. I'm reading this, but I always forget to give you what you're supposed to do, so I'm gonna skip that one. Join Vermont Humanities for a special poetry event on June 25th at Kingsland Bay Park. Vermont Humanities will also be at the Middlebury Pride events tomorrow, which I'm super excited about. If you guys don't know about it, last year, Catherine Little Liberty, our teen librarian, partnered with the Addison County Teen Center. They did our first ever Pride Parade. It was such a hit. We had a couple hundred people show up. It was fabulous. They won a grant, and now they've got it bigger and better than ever. So please come on down and support that community. Vermont Reads is going to be promoting the Vermont Reads for this year is last night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. If you don't know, it is on a lot of band. It's under fire across the country. And the last thing I want to say is thanks to the Friends of Millsy Public Library. All those book sales that you guys go to and donate to is what pays for this program and every single program you come to in this building. The town does not give us a budget for programs. So keep buying books. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Dr. Mark Timney has over 25 years of professional media experience, and he has won national awards as a mass communicator and educator. Before accepting his position at Keene State College, Mark worked as a television reporter, producer, and news anchor, as a director of public relations for a hospital, as freelance magazine and internet writer, and he operated his own public relations in an advertising company. So now he's retired because it sounds like he's earned it. He earned his MS in journalism and PhD in mass communication from Ohio University. When he isn't at Keene State, you might find him attempting an extreme sport that he is too old for, and the motorcycle in the parking lot is his. Take it away.
There it is. Yeah, please forgive the casual dress this evening.
In 3 weeks, I start on a trip up the Rockies on one of those.
Very nice. Very nice. I like adventure, and last year I got my pilot's license, and this spring I started flying that.
Oh, good.
A gyrocopter,
Yeah.
and I even bought one. This is going to be my mini Wii. So I'm a little bit of a daredevil, and that's what I'm going to turn you guys into tonight, is daredevils when it comes to digging out truth, being fearless, and more importantly, of being relentless, because unfortunately, in a day and age when the internet has made it easier than ever to get all the information we could possibly want, it's also made it, paradoxically, so much easier to get the wrong information. And we're going to find out it's not easy to sort through the crap, but we're going to have to do it. And we've got lots of challenges facing us, especially at a time when there is absolutely minimal trust in the news media. Recent Gallup poll, only 34% of the public say they have a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in the news. That number has been dropping over and over for decades. As you can see, that it's split even more so among conservatives versus liberals in their degree of trust of media. I got to tell you though, it's never been good. The best it's probably ever been was when I was a young fella, and there was this guy I've heard of called Walter Cronkite. I think I remember him, Uncle Walt. When he said it, you probably believed it. He was one of the most, if not the most trusted man in America. Those days are long gone now. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. But right now, the fake news has the upper hand. It's 70% more likely to be retweeted. It goes to a depth of 10, a about 20 times faster. And what they mean by depth is being retweeted to another level is one depth. Faster than truthful news. It only spreads to a depth of 19 for the truthful stuff. It's not good. And AI is highly likely to make things worse. And I'm going to skip over that for a second just to get to here. This is from a recent article in the New York Times here. And if you'll notice, I have footnotes for most of the information that I have here. So I can make this slideshow available to the library, and she can pass along, Renee can pass along a PDF of that. Yes?
Just, this is not new. Mark Twain, I think, said that a lie will make its way halfway around the world while truth is still putting its socks on.
Yeah, a lie will make its way halfway around the world before truth. Yeah, he was a bright guy. And so many of those are saying it's true, and it's really sad. But AI here, and it's not just the deep fake material with simulated voices and videos, it's just imagine we have some real brains right now who are coming up with this information, but now we have computers who can do it a billion times faster and from a billion different places. And because it's able to take and figure out what we like and dislike a lot more easily than it is for individual human beings to take and tailor information to us, it's likely to become even more believable to the gullible as well as to the rest of us, because it knows what we like and what we don't. And that's one of the things we'll talk a lot about tonight, is to how not to give in to what we like. By the way, this thing was hilarious if you saw this, the deep fake pictures. And more recently, we had the fake explosion at the Pentagon, which caused a dip in the stock market for a little bit. And by the way, it was interesting, somebody pointed out to me when I was double checking this too, is that this chart is terrible. It was only like a 0.5% drop for a very short amount of time. But when you saw this news popping up on the internet, look what they did with the chart. It looks like, it was a Black Tuesday all over again.
Lying statistics.
Right, yeah. Let's compress the chart in such a way that it emphasizes a drop when it's really not anywhere near that place. So one of the things that I'll start with here is the three things that we have to do individually. Things we can understand that will help us get things moving better here. Overcoming ourselves, overcoming the media, and that means understanding what it's about, and then how do we start to evaluate the journalism? And I'll give you a simple model and then later a far more complex model. And we'll work through that. And one of the advantages of having a small group here tonight is I hope you guys will pitch in even more than usual. And please feel free to ask questions at any point. And forgive me if I move this along so that we, because I could be here till midnight talking about this. It's, as you can imagine, it's highly complex. And I've taught entire classes on this an entire semester, so jamming this into an hour, it's a rush. First, a little visit back to Psych 101, which you might have had a little bit of in high school, or if you went on to college. Some key things here. Cognitive dissonance, confirmation bias, selective exposure. What is cognitive dissonance? Let's cover that take first here. This is what happens when we're exposed to ideas that conflict with what we believe. You may have heard the word dissonance from a musical perspective. What it means is sounds that clash. Imagine playing a C and a C sharp together on a piano at the same time, or just pushing your hand down all the keys at once. That's dissonance. And it happens to our brains. And believe it or not, it is unsettling to our subconscious thoughts as it is to our ears of that piano being hammered on by a monkey. We really have to think about this, because what tends to happen when the two collide is that the beliefs overrule the information that's coming in, true or false. So our first step here is always having a degree of intellectual humility about what we think we know. And especially when we think we know something, to always approach it and say, well, this is what I believe now, but I truly do want to be open to other ideas. There may be better information out there. And by the way, this is the way all of us should be all the time anyways, because guess what? Virtually everything that human beings know now or knew in the past was wrong. and later was shown to be wrong. And we evolved to that. The Earth is flat. Okay. What revolves around the sun? Or, what revolves around the Earth? All of the ideas we had were wrong. And there's no reason to think that we're not going to make those same kinds of mistakes right now or in the future, because we're human beings. Confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirming of what the existing beliefs are. I love this cartoon. I'll let you guys read it. Or maybe I should read it out loud so that the folks in the television set. Okay, so I've heard the rhetoric from both sides. Time to do my own research and find the real truth. And you Google it, and literally the first thing that comes up that agrees with what you think, there it is. Now, I got to tell you, as having been a teacher of college students for 30 plus years, oh my God, this is like, please don't get past the first page on Google, will you? Or Wikipedia. Go a little further, but we're all likely to do this. And there's some parts here we'll talk about that happens with this confirmation bias. Here is a selective perception. Even when we have more than one piece of information in front of us, we tend to choose that information that agrees with our perception more than we will other information that disagrees with it, right, wrong, or otherwise here. And some of it is a personality thing, and the other part is what we said before, cognitive dissonance. By selecting information that is comfortable, we don't have to face uncomfortable truths. And we're really good at this. I love this cartoon too. What do we line up for when it comes to facts? Oh, it's those comforting lies, not the unpleasant truths. We regularly go about this. If you're a conservative, how often do you watch MSNBC and Rachel Maddow? If you're a liberal, how often do you watch Fox News or listen to Hannity? Or did you ever turn on Rush Limbaugh when he was alive?
It's good to know how deep the swamp was.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am, please.
My dad was a professor, and what he drilled into us is always know your opponent's argument better than you know your own.
Yeah.
That was how he taught us to think.
The Chinese and Indians and Buddhists and Hindus have always have a variation on, look, your enemies, your opposites will always teach you more than your friends and those who match you will. Always. Expose yourself to that. To not just know them, but to know yourself.
And the other thing he'd say is, it says so right here in this book, so it must be true.
Yeah.
Served as a way of manipulation.
Bowing to authority, the logical fallacy of authority. Well, this person said it, it must be true. Well, one of my favorite laws is from a science fiction writer, Sturgeon's Law. It's 90% of anything is crap. I think, maybe 90% of what I'm saying is crap. I'm open to that idea. Yes, sir?
The phenomenon of wanting to not be unpopular.
Yes.
It drives a lot of the decisions we make, especially in gray areas.
Absolutely. And I'm going to diverge a little bit to evolutionary psychology and cognitive psychology with this right now. But one of the growing theories among the people working on how we think and how we think rational is this. We did not evolve, nor are our brains set to think to find truth. That's not what our brain is for. Our brain evolved to find ideas and information that helps us fit with the group, that helps us maintain or improve our status within the tribe. Because think about this 10,000, 20,000 years ago, when you're trying to preach to a crowd that doesn't like what you're going to hear, or what they're going to hear, that's not a comfortable place for you to be in and may well be life-threatening. Whereas understanding information and going along with the leader, with everyone else, may be safer. And actually, at some point like that, if you're facing, let's say, a war or some sort of tribal conflict against another tribe, you probably really do need to rally around the troops, even if you're being led for a stupid reason to fight this other tribe, because we're talking about life and death scenarios here. That's not to say that this is right or justified. What I'm saying is that's how our brains, it's believed, actually work. Overcoming the media. understanding that content creators and news creators have agendas, and that in the United States at least, news is a business, for better or worse. We can debate the possibilities of that.
20 years ago, I think it was a cost center, right? And now it became a profit center over time.
You're absolutely right, and I'll touch on that in just a second because there's some fascinating info that I was exposed to when I was a young reporter back in 1981 about what it was like to be with network news at that time. First, this idea, news has a purpose in our democratic society, and the founders created the First Amendment with freedom of speech and of the press with the idea that, look, if we can have an independent source to provide accurate, comprehensive, unbiased accounts of events, to educate the public and to mirror the world in which we live, the democratic system in which we work will function much better. This purpose then of journalism was to take and serve us in a beneficial way. The purpose was to help the system, the people. Unfortunately, if you're not a real journalistic organization with a proper moral compass or a professional compass as journalism is taught at schools like where I was at or at anywhere else in the United States, then that gets cast aside, and we see perfect examples, I would say, of that with both Fox and CNN. Their purpose there for both of them is ratings more than anything else. They have a different reason and method of getting there for ratings. Fox does it to take an appeal to a particular conservative audience. CNN does it to appeal to an audience also from a liberal standpoint, but more, I would suggest, not so much from a political ideology, but just as a pure gossip. Let's give you the news that's going to suck you in here, even though it's a total waste of time. The Murdoch trial. The lawyer who, I guess, was convicted of killing his wife and child, was it? Oh my God, how many 24 hours of coverage did they have on that? That airliner that disappeared 10, 15, 12 years ago. I mean, they were on that thing daily for a week. Why? The crap celebrity news that sucks us in, and it does, unfortunately, because every time CNN does this, the ratings go through the roof. The Murdoch gave it its highest ratings it's had in a long time.
5 crazy people in a submersible lost.
Oh my God, yeah, you're right.
700
Perfect example.
in the Caribbean.
Yeah,
What are we hearing?
yeah. I'm sorry, with all the stuff we have going on, that is an absolute abandonment of journalistic purpose. Now, it's okay for one short story, and I don't blame the Washington Post and the New York Times for posting 1 or 2 pieces a day, but they're short. They're not hours of prime time coverage. Now, for fake news and for people who are purposefully producing disinformation, or for websites that are even trying to be journalistic but are doing a crappy job of it, for the most part they're creating content that's primarily to benefit a particular group, if not themselves independently, then perhaps their own organization or their own ideology along the way. We can see that with perfect examples of both left and right. An easy one might be Breitbart. What was Alex Jones's, what was his news group name? There are equivalent ones on the liberal side too that will take and produce incredible amounts of disinformation along the way. One of the ones that constantly makes me angry, but I understand why they're trying to do it, is some of the anti-gun groups. Some of their information is awful about school shootings. One school shooting, and I won't name, well, what the heck, it was Newtown, Every Gun, what's the name of the group? You know which one I'm talking about. Yeah, skip my senior moment here. They had a school shooting listed, and it was a school that had been closed for 8 months. It happened after school hours, off the school property. How's that a school shooting?
Well, and how does that help the cause?
Right. And I know who can complain with what they're trying to do to prevent kids from being shot. But let's not take an abandon. Have a legitimate purpose here, not to advance your cause, but to take and find real solutions by producing accurate information. Now, the news is always a business, and in the United States, it's a way we've historically had for news media to keep its own independence, to not have anyone holding a purse string. In many authoritarian countries, if not most, the government runs the media. If you were with Pravda in the USSR, I mean, you worked for the Russian Communist Party. In China, they're not quite that all the way, but to actually have an independent media country there, you have to be so hand in glove with the Chinese government and to have people from the government overseeing the editorial content that it's all facade as it being independent. It's not. We chose to take and use an advertising model here. Now, unfortunately, that leads to things like CNN and Fox, because there's ways to make money out of that. But in the long run, it can work. I don't know that it is now. You had mentioned a little bit earlier about in the old days with the way news was done. When I started at the CBS affiliate in Erie, Pennsylvania as a reporter, one of the things I remember seeing is records from the past, and I don't remember how far back or how current it was, but it was a regular thing for the CBS executives and the NBC and ABC executives to brag about how much money their news division lost. We lost X million dollars this year to bring you better news than our competitors, and we're willing to lose even more to give the best news. That disappeared about the time that Reagan was coming into office, and then Clinton kind of sealed the deal because both of them deregulated the media in such a way as to make it so corporations wanted to buy in. They could buy lots of media, make lots of money, because media, news media in particular, is one of the best money-making companies out there. You know, a corporation might be very happy to make 6%, 3% profit on a year. If we go back to the 70s or so, news media was regularly making 25%. Now that number has dropped down significantly because the internet came along and spread all this money out, which sounds like a good thing because now we've got more opportunities. But the business is when there's competition, you try to produce the least product you can for the least price. And when we're talking about news, that's not good. And we've already been producing news in a bad way here, even with our profit model. So here's $5, right? I want you to give me everything I need to know. You know, I'm saying throwing more money about the place. And I want it all accurate, comprehensive, unbiased. And that's all you got. And by the way, I need it in an hour. That's what we've been asking people to do. Thank you. Yes, I'm a poor college retired professor here. So that $5 that'll get me home tonight.
Play
Big money.
a motorcycle.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Any questions on this? So, what do you do then when you're not sure about purpose, when you're not sure about a historic, or, well, yeah, you're not sure about the news or any information that you sort of get? Well, the simple, easy way is to just only accept information, at least preliminarily, from organizations with the historical records of good coverage. Yes, sir.
I wanted to offer another sort of big picture. To my mind, just looking at my own behavior, news is something that goes on, it's kind of in the background, I'm busy, and it is entertainment. So it really is entertainment for most people most of the time until something catches their attention, then you really want to know. So I don't know, that's something that operates in the background of my...
I think for a lot of people, it is probably more entertainment than information they actively seek with a purpose beyond. Yeah, people have the radio on in the car. It's, you know, the television's set on while they're doing something at home. You know, I would imagine you are not typical news consumers in this audience because you came here tonight. You have this interest in that. Most people really don't get concerned with this until the crap hits the fan. And unfortunately, it tends to be the kind of things like this stupid submarine missing that makes people pay attention rather than the real news. True story. I got let go from my first station because of monetary issues, and they wanted to hire a woman for the job rather than me.
Pay her less?
No, she probably got paid the same $5 I did to work 60 hours a week part-time with no benefits, weekends, nights, every holiday. And we each beat out about 100 people for the job. So I went to work for the other station in town there, which was number 3 in the ratings. We had a new news director come in, and his thing is, look, these other stations, all as they do is blood and guts, if it bleeds, it leads kind of news. Action news, that was the format at the time, literally. And when I worked for that station, our little Subaru wagons that we had, they were painted red. They looked like red police cars with big things on the side. We had a little yellow light. The front lights blinked, and we were told, race like hell to the to the thing. We'll pay your ticket. And that was the kind of atmosphere there was. So the station says, we're going to change. We're going to be like, we're going to give people news they can use. And that was the slogan. And this was a trend that was being tried in markets all over the country, including larger markets like Miami. And guess what? Every market that did this got creamed in the ratings. Because we didn't do the blood and guts news. We did the Today at City Hall. You know, here's an economic outlook. People didn't want it. So, if it's not just outright ignoring it, it's just an apathetic attempt at attention. Now, we realize that we've gotten to this point now that it's even hard to tell who to trust. And we've certainly seen many instances of mainstream media organizations totally blowing information. The New York Times' coverage of the run-up to the Iraq War was abysmal, and was actually, they were played beautifully by politicians and pundits. And we can find examples of that with all mainstream news organizations not doing the job that we would hope they would do. In large part, I would argue, because of economic issues. They don't have the resources they used to have. Newsrooms have shrunk radically, between 20 and 40% in most news organizations around the United States. You can't do more with less. And you certainly can't do equality. So we're going to end up at a point here where we're going to have to take and figure out the information more on our own than we've had to in the past, especially because since we're getting competing information from so many different sources before, it used to be the big 3 networks. Well, you know, we only had 3 really options to think about, and maybe what we read in our hometown paper from the Associated Press, if it was national or international news, or what our local paper. We didn't have that many truths to choose from. Now we have hundreds, if not literally millions of bits of information. What do? Use this model. I have the link to this. The group is called criticalthinking.org. It is an independent, nonprofit, academic organization. It's headed by a fellow by the name of Paul Elder, who's been writing about critical thinking for decades now. And I started teaching this about 12, 13 years ago, and I'm convinced it's the most important thing I've ever taught in my life or ever could possibly teach. And what it is what he calls the elements of thought. And what Elder means by this is that when you're thinking, whether you know it or not, you're using most, if not all, of these elements, or you should be using these 8 elements. We tend to take shortcuts along the way because of things like selective perception, cognitive dissonance, exposure, etc., etc. But if we're thinking about how we're thinking when we're thinking, I love that. How am I thinking about my thinking now when I'm thinking about this? You need to do this and to consciously go back through these 8 steps. So what I'm going to take and do real quick is go through these 8 steps with you. Now, I've spent entire semesters working with students on this. So you guys are getting a real crash course in this. But here's the tricky part. It's simple. But it's so simple, it's wicked hard. Okay? We'll see what you think. First off, we have a question. And by the way, you can enter any sort of thinking that you're doing at any point on this circle. You just need to get through all of it. Let's talk about the question here. Well, we have that all the time, but how are we phrasing that question? Let's say we're talking about mass shootings, which I mentioned earlier. Well, how you ask the question here is going to be real important, especially if you're trying to come up with a solution and you're talking with people with opposing viewpoints here. So if you say, well, how do we get rid of guns to stop mass shootings? That's a question that's probably going to anger somebody who is a strong Second Amendment supporter. And if the other part is, well, why don't we start that question then with something like, well, what is it we really want to do? What's our purpose here? Do we want to prevent kids from being shot or have fewer shootings among gangs? How about we ask that question then? Okay. Always think about the question that's being asked and make sure that you're talking with people and you're sure that you're clear in your own mind about what the question is that you're asking when you read that information and what question did that journalist ask. And then one quick other thing here, which is an aside. What type of question is it? Is it a no system question, a one system question, or a multi-system question? What's a no system question? That's a question when there's really no way to measure. Is there a God? Is chocolate better than raspberry?
Yes.
As a flavor. But there's really, is this person a jerk? I could use a-hole, but we're on television. Well, one person's jerk is another person's good time. Oh, he's the life of the party. No, he's not. He's a jerk. How do you measure this? There's no system for this. One system questions. These are those types of things where we can all agree that there is primarily one, and maybe only one way to take and measure this. How much fluid is in a jar? We might do it in metric or English, but there's a measurement. How many mass shootings were there? Now, technically, we should be able to count those, but what do we mean by mass shooting? We'll come back into this idea of concept here a little bit later. But at least we could take and find out, well, did murders go down or up last year? We might not have an exact count, because sometimes murders, we don't even know there was a murder, a person disappears. Maybe they were murdered, but we don't know that. But we can kind of get ballpark ideas. There is a system here, counting. But then here's the tricky parts, and this is all those questions like, what do we do about mass shootings? Or let's use one close to home here in Vermont. You guys legalized pot, right? Has this been good for Vermont? Has legalizing pot been good for Vermont? There are many systems by which you can measure this and answer that question in a logical, perfect way. However, different, well-meaning, rational, logical, caring people will preference some systems over others in coming to a conclusion here. For example, you might look at this, is this been good for Vermont, from a purely medical perspective. And that's where I'm over here right now, point of view, frame of reference perspective. I hate point of view. They should not have used that term, because when I ask you your point of view on abortion, you're going to tell me, oh, I'm for or against. That's not what they mean here. What they're asking is, how are you looking at this? Are you looking at this as a man who has a wife or a girlfriend who's considering abortion, or are you approaching this as a medical doctor? Or as, etc. So, back to the marijuana thing again, you could look at it medically. You could look at it economically. Has this been good for Vermont economically? What's some of the other frames of references, perspectives you can use for that? Let me quiz you guys.
Safety.
Public safety, absolutely.
Joy.
Yeah, how about from a purely hedonistic perspective?
Criminal justice.
Yep. Political. There are a lot of different legitimate, relevant, significant perspectives. And how we answer this is probably going to determine, well, which of these perspectives we're going to prefer. So it becomes a judgment call rather than an absolute best, let's say, the most perfect answer. Okay? So some people's best answers are going to be different, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we at least understand how they're preferencing their preferences. See what I mean about it getting tough? So, part of this first part here with points of view and questions and purposes here is to remember too, well, what is your purpose in doing this? If we're doing the gun debate, and we have a group here that's perhaps members of the NRA and of the more conservative side of the NRA, well, the NRA's stated purpose is to maintain firearms laws, or even roll back restrictions on firearms laws as they are right now, to keep the Second Amendment as they envision it. That's very different than the purpose of an anti-gun group, such as the Brady handgun control, which really wants to get rid of all handguns. I think that's still their stated purpose. I may be wrong in that, but it was at one time. Well, if you've got two groups that are coming together to talk about this and their purpose are at cross odds, that's not a good place to start. We can at least find a place by reframing that question again where we might be able to take and find, okay, we can agree on this purpose. Let's start there. And I bet what I've seen happen many times on very controversial issues is that people find out they're a lot closer than they think they are. And that the hatred and the suspicion can be reduced by at least starting to explain these kinds of principles. Any questions on this stuff so far? Okay. So, concepts. Well, we asked that question about, what should we do about abortion? Well, let's make sure we have some concepts clear. What's a fetus? What's a soul? What are the principles and laws regarding abortion historically, and how they relate to the way medical care is provided? What's a late-term abortion? If we're not having an agreement on concepts, then there's going to be always problems in finding compromise and finding solutions. One of the interesting things, and it's a very obvious one, and I've done talks on what Hollywood, the media, and conservatives and liberals get wrong about guns. That was one of my Vermont Humanities Council's presentations, was what's the concept of an assault rifle? Because they're two different things to different groups. And there are actually 5 or 6 different main things depending upon what perspective you're coming from, and they're not in agreement with the base reality of what an assault rifle is or isn't. Now, I don't want to go off into the bushes on that, but an assault rifle has to be capable of fully automatic fire, meaning if you hold the trigger back, it just keeps shooting. People don't have machine guns. Well, actually, there are lots of machine guns in the United States, but they're very limited in numbers, and it takes a lot of money, time, and effort to get them, and they're rarely any sort of problem. Actually, I'm not even sure, maybe once every, I don't even know the last time somebody's used a machine gun in a crime, unless it was illegally modified in some way. So let's make sure that we lay out our concepts here so that we understand where we're coming from on this. Assumptions. This is one of the harder ones. What are we taking for granted? What do we think we know that we really don't have any evidence for, or maybe don't have any good evidence for, but we think it's true? Do we know that? Do we know what we don't know? Do we assume things like, I know all of the issues? The tough thing about assumptions is, just by their very nature, is you're usually not aware of it. And we have to really pay attention to those sorts of things, especially when we're applying all the rest of these and we're starting to get into things like implications and consequences. Well, if we did this, then what? I gave a talk on a radio show here in Vermont on yesterday, where they asked, well, why is it we can't just make places like TikTok and Facebook and all these social medias responsible for the content on it? Okay, and I said, well, what's the implication then you're kind of making it sound like it, and I said this earlier to the librarian here, how would you like to be responsible for all of the information in the books that you have, and to be held accountable for that? Conservative, liberal. And part of the Communications Act of 1996 was to take and maintain a status quo in the dissemination of information. Just as a librarian in a library cannot be held responsible for what's in a book, the government and our politicians at the time thought, let's keep that for the internet too. We want a free flow of information here. Now, let me ask you, Renee, if somebody comes back and says, well, look, here's a case of libel in a book that you have here, what's the process? Do you do anything with that, Renee?
The person can make a request to have the book withdrawn from the collection, and there's a whole process and procedure. It goes under review, starts with our director, and then if it goes further, they would get a bunch of people together and look at it, and then those people get to decide whether the book stays or goes. But I don't believe that we would decide whether it was actual libel or not.
Right. So I don't know how much the sound is picked up from other people in the room. They can hear that, or do I need to repeat it? They can't. Excellent. Okay, so you can imagine how incredibly difficult. I mean, that's time consuming, correct?
Yeah,
It would be a pain.
it would be.
Can you imagine that for Google, for TikTok? It's impossible to do. I mean, and we can see how Twitter, especially under the guidance of of Musk, the difficulties they've had in trying to figure out what to do with crap information, or even good information. It's so wide open, and there is a recognition that this internet thing is going to explode in such a way that it is going to become impossible for any organization to police it. So rather than have a chilling effect upon speech, it's thought, let's just let it go out there and we'll let rational people figure out whether it's good information or not. Now, there's one difference. Renee's not out peddling specific books with specific ideologies. These social media sites often are. Now, are they doing it, or is the algorithm doing it? And who creates the algorithm? Well, to some extent we do. We're the ones who decide what we want. So if you're a conservative, you tend to view more conservative material, and you get fed more conservative material. Now, the algorithm can be tuned to feed you that. I'd love to see an algorithm that for every article you get that supports something you believe in strongly, you get an article that is the opposite of that. Wouldn't that be interesting? I don't know how that works. But boy, maybe that would help a little bit. So understanding those implications and consequences. Now, coming back to the conclusion, that's pretty self-explanatory. But one of the things I want to talk about here with information and data and facts, and this is where it gets very complicated here. On the left-hand side of this are what the Center for criticalthinking.org calls intellectual standards. And their contention is that when you're doing any of these things, but it's very applicable for the information, the data, it's true for all of it here. Are you really getting clear information? Is it accurate? Is it precise? And what I mean by precise is, if I ask you, well, what's the weather like? You could say, well, it's 70 and sunny. That might be 100% accurate, but it's not very precise. What's the barometric pressure? How much wind is there? What's the dew point? We don't always need that for the weather, because basically I'm trying to figure out, do I need to wear a coat or not? Or get an umbrella. But if we're talking about gun control or abortion or blah, 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 precision can make a huge difference here. Is it relevant too? And that's kind of what I was talking about here with weather. For the most part, I don't need to know the dew point. Although we really should pay attention to that, because if the dew point's close to the temperature, that means rain. Okay. The depth and breadth of the information. Most news isn't very deep, nor is it broad. It's not intended to be. It's supposed to be a day's event. This is what's happening now. It's other articles that will come later that go into the breadth and depth, the educational pieces, the mirror pieces. But we often forget that that first draft of history, as journalism is called, tends to just be not much more than a headline with a few W's of the who, what, when, where, you know, in it. Not so much the why yet. Is it logical? Is it fair? How do you judge those? It takes work. Now, I want to leave time for lots of questions here, but some of the things that will help you along with those three things, as well as to raise some degree of skepticism and a little alarm to say, go through the element of thoughts here, are these. If you've never heard of this news source or content creator, author before, ding, ding, ding. Okay. It cites minimal evidence or no sources for information, or the sources themselves are suspect. Do I only hear from people from left-wing think tanks or right-wing think tanks? Ding, 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 ding. If you can't find other information online that supports this, it should be ringing alarm bells. And then start to watch for stuff like spelling, grammar. The New York Times had an interesting piece a while back about some of the disinformation that was being created by Russian provocateurs during the last presidential election here. And in particular, there was a series that came out that were meant to take and create division between whites and blacks, especially whites who were perhaps already afraid of black people, had some degree of racist thoughts about it. So they posted these ads in places where conservatives were likely to see it. And I know you're not going to be able to read that, and I'm going to have to come around and read it too. Well, first off, if you're afraid of people of color, the picture in and of itself is probably going to scare you a little bit. So look at the provocative thing, the leather jacket, the beret, it's shades of Black Panther with the negative connotations related to that. Firearm, spear, but here, how do we tell? Join Black Elevation Team, comma, we're hiring. That's a comma splice. It's not correct grammar. So right away, we should recognize this is probably not legit, because anyone who's legitimately putting out an ad and paying, I mean, an ad like this, even that big in a small newspaper, is $400 or $500. Watch for little of that.
And there's always snows.
Yes, or factcheck.org. And sometimes I have problems with how the methodology of some of those organizations, and again, I don't trust anyone, but they're generally fairly accurate. And it will at least get you to think about, oh, okay, this may be questionable. Let me dig into it some more before I start tweeting it to everyone under the sun. So we've got 9 minutes before the top of the hour, so that leaves us some time to talk about whatever it is you guys would like to talk about with finding truth, separating you, jumping at the bit. You've been very well behaved, sir. No, I know, I'm teasing you because we were having fun earlier today talking about a barrage of questions. Yeah. Go ahead, shoot.
Well, I wanted to, rather than ask a question at the moment, I wanted to suggest something about the critical thinking circle there.
Mm-hmm.
What I have found useful in critical thinking, I'm a designer, I was a mechanical engineer, but also a designer, so I make stuff. And you start with all of these things that you've got to put on the table, how to think about a problem, how to sort, using all of those elements that you have there.
Sure.
But especially when I was working on the analysis for my paper. What I realized, this is something I've used all the time.
Yeah.
It's critical thinking. It is, as you say, it is absolutely huge. It's nothing that we're taught in school.
Right.
It should be.
Yep.
It's challenging, and one winds up feeling uncomfortable when you think like this, because it leads you to places you would not have ordinarily wanted to go, your parents would never ask you to go. But when I think about this, we look at your graph of the drop in the stock market. Okay, so imagine that, and you know there's a rest of the curve.
Right.
So if you stand back and expand that frame, you see the rest of the curve.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, if the if the vertical...
Right, that wasn't to use an ecological, that was not a fair presentation of the data.
Absolutely.
It was a misleading one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the impression of the
And the abscissa has got to go to 0. So you have all of the whole scale there.
Yeah.
Okay, that is basically, you look at this, and it's just so popular in when they're pushing for, trying to get your money get you to invest. Investment folks do this all the time. We're looking at charts all the time. But for looking at, for critical thinking, it really is a stepping back to view a problem from in a broader perspective, from a distance. And you see the whole picture.
Sure.
And so that was just a way to start. And then within that, of course, all of those 8 elements are...
Yeah. And if you go to their website or just Google criticalthinking.org, elements of thought, you'll see that that's actually an animated interactive chart. So when you roll over each of the 8 things, it'll take and give you definitions and examples. It's beautiful. And they even have a $4 book that's like 15 pages or so that goes through all of the things that I talked about here tonight. It's the best $4 you'll ever spend in your life. But I warn you this, people will not like you because you will never lose an argument, ever. Because you'll know when you're not on the right side and you won't argue about it. And you'll know how to tear apart other people's arguments. In part, it cost me my second marriage. Because the things you're telling me are not logical, dear. What is your purpose here? It becomes awful because you can create cognitive dissonance in others quite easily by being a master of this. What else? Yes?
So I had a question, you touched on this a little bit with kind of the recent trends and kind of video feeds for news. Is there any kind of shifts in that 8 format, the chart there, that you would think are more susceptible to video news versus print? Or kind of like that quick exploration there?
That's one of the great things I like about this chart and the idea of critical thinking is that these are the fundamental principles, the foundations on any sort of thinking. It doesn't matter what technology we're talking about. It doesn't matter what subject we're talking about. It applies to everything. So that's the good part. Now, I guess maybe this is what you're asking, and tell me if I'm not answering your question. AI is going to make it harder to do that because how do we really judge accuracy in a photograph? Now, what I'm hoping, and nobody's talked about this, is that if AI can create this, AI should also be able to recognize it. And my understanding is it can. And just as hackers have been able to hack in, computer programmers have been able to design programs and write programs to keep them out. And it's a constant battle. And I think we'll see the exact same thing. But I will say this. Every time we've had a communication revolution, invention of writing, the printing press, high-speed printing, radio, film, television, now the internet, and AI, which is part of this digital communication revolution. Every time this has happened, nobody's had any clue what was coming, and most of the predictions were wrong. Not even friggin' close. And a lot of things they never thought about happened, and a lot of things they worried about never happened. I'd be surprised if this is any different. History shows us it probably won't be. I hope I'm surprised. But we'll go from there. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it kind of relates exactly to that where like AI is also working under its own set of assumptions and kind of like the inputs that create the systems itself. So
Yeah.
going back to the what is in the algorithm and how do we contribute to that.
Hinton says it's a black box, and we'll never know.
Yep, exactly. Not unless regulation comes through, which.
Well, we'll never know. If Hinton doesn't know, ain't nobody knows.
Right.
Do we ever know anyone? I mean, you know, much less.
Another question.
Much less. Yeah, we're getting pretty existential here for that.
Another thing is, sorry,
No, go ahead, Elizabeth.
another thing is, many people my age don't do social media unless it's grandchildren, because we are so susceptible to being influenced without knowing. And that's just one way to say you can't have my mind. You just can't have it. Stay off it.
This has been a universal human trait from as far back as we can go, like, well, let's say writing. Well, somebody wrote it down, it must be true. Well, somebody put it in a book, it must be true. I saw it in a film, it must be true. I heard it on the radio, it must be true. I heard it on television. Why do we give this authority to the media? Because it's just another technology to pass along good and bad information. It's a hammer. We can use it to build, we can use it to bash. And as long as we remember that. Now, social media, like all media, just exacerbates existing problems more than it brings about new ones.
It's the feed. It's the feed. It's just, it'll kill you.
And we just, remember, we're in its infancy. When films first came out, we were terrified of what that was going to do, and there were people preaching that, this is going to ruin all the morality and morals of our children. I mean, I remember, and I don't remember which ancient Greeks it was, but they were contemporaries of Socrates and Plato. It may even been some of the big guys there. Like, oh, we shouldn't teach people how to read. They're not smart enough. They'll read that and interpret it wrong. We don't want them to have that information. I mean, this stuff goes all the way back to the start. So.
Here we are, internet porn.
Yes. Yes. Right. Always the first business to succeed in new media. Always.
Oh, interesting.
We can go right back to the historic. Porn was right there from the start of the earliest mass media.
That's another topic, right?
Yes. And one without the television play.
I am acknowledging my own bias. Mostly get my news from either the New York Times or NPR. And I found myself at a friend's house who was playing MSNBC on the Trump indictment day. And we sat down, and I could not even take these people seriously as I was watching this feed. And they're like, well, we don't have, nobody's in the courtroom, and I mean the stuff that and it was just this constant, and I'm like, and I'm laughing, and I like Rachel Maddow. I think she's brilliant, and the things that she writes are fantastic, but her show is about ratings, and that's all there is. So they're bringing her in, and I'm sitting here with my very dear friends, and I'm just laughing. And so my question is, if I wanted to open my mind to a news source that it does not agree with my preconceived notions and my own biases, so MSNBC obviously aligns with me, I'm a pretty liberal person, I don't even know where to go for a conservative, like for a little while I
A
was looking
legitimate
at the
conservative
Hill.
view?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, that's a really good question.
I mean, I'm not saying that
Do
these
you have a
liberal
thought?
outlets
Yes.
are
There's a magazine a week I've been reading for 10 years. It's privately owned. They publish excerpts from the National Review. They publish excerpts from the New
and it's
York
called The
Times.
Week.
The Week.
Week.
Thank you.
In fact, I have it in my car. I'll give it to you.
Oh, okay.
You know,
I was gonna donate
occasionally-
it to the co-op.
National Review can have some great
They can.
information.
I'm just
And
saying
The
that-
Economist, which
They
is
put
often
it's across
more
the
conservative,
spectrum.
can have it. One of the places I go to, not so much to get an opposite viewpoint, but one that is more independent, especially when it deals with U.S. national and international, the BBC.
I go to BBC a lot also.
It's also banned pretty badly.
It can
Very
be.
liberal, and the climate change stuff is just driving nuts.
And it's disaster porn, too.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the competition brings out the best and worst in people, and it's true in organizations too, and we see that here. I do like NPR news. I think it's the best broadcast news in America. I do have problems with its story selection, which I find has a considerable liberal bias in what they
Yes.
cover and what they don't.
And even just the way they phrase things.
Yeah.
I notice it hits me, slaps me across the face all the time.
Wall Street Journal?
I like their stuff. I stopped reading the New York Times, not so much because I didn't trust it most of the time, but because they stopped attributing information the way they used to do. I didn't see said so-and-so. That was disappearing from a lot of, and maybe, we can talk a little bit more, but this might not be a bad place to close here. Remember this, nobody's holding a gun to your head to make you watch or read or listen to any of this stuff. And if you want it to change, and the television set watching this here today, stop using the media. That's bad. If you stop, they will react because they have to make money. And as long as we're willing to accept crap, they'll feed us more crap. The second we stop, that will change. So while we can blame the media a lot, we've got to blame ourselves too. And we have to be responsible enough to voice when we see something that we don't think is fair. And we have to vote with our pocketbook. When a news organization or any organization fails to live up to reasonable standards of information transmission. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, wonderful.
And I'm here for a while, so I'll be more than happy to answer any more questions you have.
Just going to get you.
Just thought I'd wrap it up for the TV.